Let's do it. Hello and welcome to ATP Insights, where we cover the most important tech news in Asia. Today is not Thursday. It is Monday, the 22nd of June, 2026. Let's get right to it. Okay. Our big story of the day is HCLTech leads a $1.5 billion Sarvam AI round in India. And we've got another super great show with a great lineup of guests as well. Initially, we will have Aytekin, founder and CEO at Jotform. He's going to join us to talk about how AI-powered workflow automation helps businesses turn everyday data collection into faster, more accessible, and more important operations. Following that, we will welcome Nisha Kohli, co-chair ESG World Summit and Grit Awards at CorpStage, to discuss how AI-powered ESG platforms help companies turn sustainability, governance, and compliance into measurable business execution. Next, we will talk to Abhijit Ramesh, Head of Innovation, Growth Products, and Partnerships, Asia Pacific at Visa. Yeah, that Visa. To cover how trusted agentic commerce will change the way consumers, merchants, and financial institutions turn intent into payments. And then Damien Wong, Senior Vice President, APAC at Tricentis, is going to talk about how agentic quality engineering will help enterprises move faster without losing control of their development process. And later in the program, we'll be joined by Patrick Tobler, founder at Masumi. Must be one of his friends' names. Anyway, to explore how decentralized agent infrastructure is going to help businesses build trusted, interoperable, and commercially useful AI systems. And finally, Michael Wasielewski, founder and CEO at Generative Security, will join us to talk about how securing user interactions and generative AI helps enterprises launch customer-facing AI products with confidence. And before we get to all of our guests and some news, let's hear from our presenting partner, Twilio. Twilio is the secure and scalable platform to build amazing customer engagement without the complexity, with the AI-driven workflows you need to connect. They are trusted by over 300,000, yeah, you heard me, 300,000 businesses. It is the platform that makes more possible. Visit Twilio.com to start building today. Okay, let's get to some news. Sarvam AI just became one of the most important AI infrastructure stories in India, and not just the only one. And we wanted to talk about this, right? Because HCLTech is investing about $150 million for a 10.5% stake, leading Sarvam Series B. Think about it. That's a Series B in India, and valuing the company at $1.5 billion. The round has closed $234 million so far, towards a planned $300 million raise, which feels like a rounding error these days, with Bessemer Venture Partners, Coastal Ventures, and Peak 15 also involved. And to me, I don't love talking about valuations. The valuation's cool, okay? It is cool, but it's not the most important thing here. To me, the most important thing is the shape of the deal, and maybe even more interestingly, its participants and its lead investor. This is an Indian IT services giant, so that's HCLTech, right? Putting strategic capital into an Indian foundational AI company. HCLTech has said the investment will support Sarvam's R&D and agentic AI, coding, and cybersecurity use cases. Just sounds like typical foundational frontier lab type stuff, while also helping HCL itself build language-specific and sovereign AI solutions for governments, regulated industries, and its own global enterprise clients. So Sarvam here is trying to make a point, and I think that this point is actually pretty interesting as well. India needs AI that understands India at its core. And remember, first of all, let me give you my perspective. For a few years, I did an entire show called India Game Changer. We did a ton of work and spoke to a ton of people, venture capitalists, startup founders, incumbent companies, well-built Series A, Series B, Series C companies in India. We've done a lot of work. And I'm not saying that I know everything about the Indian tech ecosystem, but we don't know nothing either. You have to understand this, right? That one of the things that all of the founders, all of the businesses in India said to me was that you could literally go from whatever city you were in, and from whatever second tier or third tier city you were in, you could go 100 miles north, 100 miles south, 100 miles east, and 100 miles west, and you could have a different language, different food, different everything, different processes. So all of these languages, all of the workflows in India, and all of the cost structures need to be understood for a proper AI company to exist in India. And again, just cutting and pasting something from the West, whether it's Anthropic or whether it's OpenAI, is probably not going to work unless it's purpose-built just for India. Remember, in any country with a very distinct culture, sovereign AI is only great if it understands the entire value chain inside the country in which it's trying to promote sovereignty. And I'll put that sovereignty in quotes, right? To be fair, as well, again, just from talking to tons of people in India during our India Game Changers show, this is part of a larger long-term national push. One of the things we learned, right, was that the initial sort of Indian tech ecosystem development started with a lot of the graduates from IIT, right, going to the United States, going to Australia, going to the UK, getting a master's degree, getting a PhD, and then staying in those countries. Most of which actually went to the United States, went to Texas, went to Chicago, went to New York, went to Boston, went to California to try to build big companies. And you can look at some of the big premier companies in the United States. Who's running them? The Indian diaspora is actually running these companies. So this is not a new thing. But what ended up happening was 7 years, 10 years, 12 years into this trend, a lot of the Indian guys and gals that ended up going to the United States said, wait a second, this market is slightly overbrokered. It's a term we used to use when I was at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. Too many people competing for the same thing. And if I go back to India, there's still a ton of competition there. It's not like there's no competition. There's tons of competition. But the market itself is way more greenfields, right? And India has been investing now in people and in companies that say, we're building not for the world at the beginning, but building for India and then from India for the world. And this is a pretty good sort of secular change that's been taking place there, and one that I find very, very interesting. India has been investing as well in multilingual AI infrastructure through efforts like Bhashini and Bharat Gen. Bhashini supports Indian language digital access, while Bharat Gen is described by India's Press Information Bureau as a government-funded, homegrown multimodal model supporting 22 Indian languages across text, speech, and image understanding. And remember, Sarvam has also built an important global relationships without giving up, and this is important, right? It's India first identity. Microsoft partnered with them in 2024 to bring its Indic voice LLM work to Azure. So it was so differentiated and so good that Microsoft, instead of going out and building this language capability on its own, so we're probably just going to license it. We're just going to use that stuff. We're going to put it on as part of Azure. And Google DeepMind essentially did the same thing. They've highlighted Sarvam's work using Gamma 3 to build translation capabilities across India's 22 officially recognized languages. But notice I've said officially recognized. There are tons of other languages in India. And if you meet a person from India, and frankly, if you've lived in Asia for as long as I have, I've met a ton of different people from India, all from different places throughout the country. All of these people are multilingual because they all speak English, they all speak Hindi, and then they all speak one or two of the local dialects from the city or from the town where they originated. In a way, it's super, super cool. And now, excuse me, Sarvam is now one of the clearest private sector expressions of this shift of now saying, instead of just participating and being a user of this massive AI on the consumer and both the services side, we want to become a builder of AI infrastructure as well. And I presume, and I'm pretty sure that this is going to be supported by the government. Let's dig a little bit deeper, as we like to do. What is this deal? What do we think that this deal says about the changing role of Indian IT services companies in AI? So we talked a little bit about HCLTech at the beginning of this segment. It's not just reselling AI tools or integrating third-party models. It is taking an equity stake in a foundational AI company and connecting that investment to enterprise delivery, sovereign AI, which is going to be very important, and regulated industry use cases. And this is important, really important, right? Because Indian IT services firms already sit really, really close, as you know, to enterprise workflows, compliance requirements, and all of the legacy infrastructure that's existed in India for a while. And one of the missing pieces for them has been this deeper ownership of AI IP and model capability. And to be fair, right, if you understand just how strong the Indian tech ecosystem is, again, not just the diaspora, but what's happening inside of India itself, you know that it was just a matter of time. China's built their own models. Singapore is actually building some models, but a lot of those companies actually end up being Chinese. We have Mistral coming from Europe out of France. And of course, we have Anthropic, we have OpenAI, and to some level, although they're not building models, but Cursor, which was just bought by xAI. There's a pretty robust ecosystem in the United States as well. And don't be fooled by this. India is going to build its own. And Sarvam gives HCLTech a way, a methodology, a pathway to combine its enterprise transformation business with models, as I said before, designed for India's languages, India's documents, and just the deployment realities of existing in India. Now, remember, the cost basis in India is going to be lower, right? So the amount of money that people are going to pay for these types of services is just simply going to be lower than they would be in the United States or in Europe. And frankly, probably lower than they would be in Japan. But the business model that Sarvam is building is going to be able to handle that. And the cost of not just building their products, but actually selling and distributing their products are going to be lower. And having HCLTech on board, particularly as a lead investor, is really going to be helpful, I believe, for a go-to-market for enterprises, developers, and frankly, to serve the Indian government as well. The biggest implication here for me is that services firms may be one of the distribution layers. So if you look again at what OpenAI, what Anthropic were doing in the United States, they have all these forward deployed engineers, right? And both of them took kind of different strategies. I can't remember who did what, but I think it was OpenAI who actually said, let's go, it doesn't really matter, right? Let's go with the consulting companies and we'll use their distribution mechanism to get to our potential clients. And then Anthropic or vice versa. I can't remember. Don't hold me to it. Email Martin on this, okay? That's like a podcast joke. But anyway, you can email me too. But the point is that the other company actually went with their investors. So they went to every venture capitalist in the world that is going to invest in other companies and said, let's get our AI deployed via the relationships you already had. Everybody's looking for distribution. And to be fair, in India, that distribution is probably going to happen through these services companies, right? So particularly this implication is that this is going to be the distribution methodology for sovereign and industry-specific AI, especially where clients need implementation, customization, and ongoing support, because that's one of the things where HCL actually already specializes. And that's super cool. So why is Sarvam's India's first language strategy so important? Well, again, the more you know about India and the more I've learned about it, the more I realize it seems to us from the outside that it's kind of a one, maybe 1.5 language market, right? Because all the interactions that we have with people from India, very well educated, and to be fair, the entire population is very well educated there, is English. So it feels like it's an English-only country, but that's not even close to a reality, okay? Sarvam's whole premise is that AI has to work across Indian speech, Indian documents, and the entire Indian linguistic context. You know, and I always say, like, do your own research on this, but this is really important. As I said before, if you speak to any Indian entrepreneur, and frankly, anybody involved in the Indian tech ecosystem, they will tell you, go 100 miles in any direction, and it feels like you're in a completely different place from a language perspective and from a food perspective, and in some ways, a cultural interaction perspective, which makes implementing artificial intelligence there, particularly LLMs, way more difficult than it might be in a place like the United States, where, sure, in Boston and Kentucky, there might be words that are different for different types of foods and different types of sort of feelings. But at the end of the day, it's the same English language. And there's more the same than that's different. Okay, so Sarvam's platform includes text to speech, speech to text, all the things you would expect from a large language model. And it's important that we understand just how difficult it is to implement all this language stuff. Google's DeepMind, I already mentioned them in the intro here. They're right up on Sarvam's translation work, points to the core technical problem, but also the core technical opportunity. Many global LLMs were historically trained around Western languages and contexts. It's hard for us to understand, right, as native English speakers. And if we are expatriates in Asia, even if we're, again, even if we're not expatriates, but if we're native English speakers, we take for granted the fact that there are plenty of places in the world where English is not the native language. And because it's not the native language, it also means that the context and the way that the language is used is different. So training it around training your LLM around a Western language, and then hoping that the context, which is always going to be the most important part, at least in my mind, about artificial intelligence and how it gets used, around one language, then hoping it applies to another language, is just fool's gold in my mind. Okay. So many of these, as I said, were historically trained around Western languages and context, and Indian's language quality can break down, especially in structured documents, code formats, Markdown, HTML. If you just think about any kind of scientific notation and mixed format inputs. And to be fair, one of my longstanding Indian friends actually sent me a video last week, I think, about something that they wanted to post on LinkedIn or post on YouTube or post on TikTok. And it was super interesting to me because it was in English, but not 100%. And I don't know what the other language was. I'm presuming it was Hindi. But just like random words were thrown in. And you see this a lot with people that are bilingual, actually. Right? I heard this a lot when I was in Japan. You'd have people say, like, are you onakasuita? Which means, are you hungry? But it's weird the way sort of the bilingual or the trilingual or the multilingual mind works. And to mimic that, the LLM is going to have to mimic the same thing. So Sarvan's transformation model was built to translate across all 22 officially recognized Indian languages and to preserve context, formatting, and cultural nuance. It's the cultural nuance that's really hard. Again, if you're bilingual, you know the cultural nuance is the most important thing, most important part of any language, right? You really have to understand like what's going on to really understand what's really going on. You have to understand like the nuances of the language. And that's actually really, really important. Okay. Because if you don't understand the nuances of the language, you're never going to understand the nuances of the culture. And for a country like India with a massive linguistic diversity, voice and language, these are not interface issues. They are infrastructure issues. So now we have to ask ourselves a question. What should we watch actually to understand whether this becomes a real platform story? Is it going to work? We have to get a sense of if this is really going to work, right? Give me 1 second. The first thing to watch is enterprise adoption. Who's going to use this? Right. Sarvam already claims use cases across banking, financial services, and other industries like that. But let's just see how this works, right? And we're going to have to see who actually uses this. The second is model performance and cost. The Sarvam research focuses includes agentic coding and cybersecurity use cases, which it suggests it wants to move beyond language access into higher value enterprise. And the last thing is deployment control. This is something that we've already talked about, and we will get to that as well. Okay, Martin, before we welcome our first guest, let's do our second read. How does that sound, Martin? Okay, Boomi is the data activation company for AI. Boomi powers the agentic enterprise by bringing data to life across your business. Trusted by over 30,000 customers and supported by a network of 800 or more partners, Boomi helps organizations of all sizes achieve agility, efficiency, and innovation at scale. Let's welcome our first guest right now. We're going to welcome the CEO at Jotform in just a moment. How are you doing today? Awesome. So names to me are really important. Please tell me how I properly pronounce your first name. Aytekin. Easy.
Aytekin, yes.
That's great. And where are you from?
Turkey.
Beautiful. Okay, we wanted to have you on. Thank you so much, by the way, for making the time to come here, Aytekin. We wanted to have you on to talk about how AI-powered workflow automation helps businesses turn everyday data into faster, more accessible, and more intelligent operations. But first, before we get to that in detail, tell us a little bit about Jotform.
So I started Jotform 20 years ago. It's like 2 decades. Yeah.
Oh my God, go ahead.
Yeah, and Jotform has 40 million users and 800 employees, and it's been around for a while. And before Jotform, I worked for an internet company in New York, and and I would build all these like forms for our editors. Like
Right.
we had so many forms, and then okay, I decided that there should be an easy way to build forms, and that's how it started. But that was just the beginning. Forms were just the beginning. Over the years, what we discovered was people actually need to automate their workflows, their
Yep.
work, and forms are just the first step. So we started building all the tools they might need when they're automating. But it's always the journey always starts with the forms. And it's
Why
I
does
have
it?
no idea how 20 years passed. Yeah.
Neither do I, to be fair. I've seen most of it manifest itself in my daughter growing up, which is kind of cool. But let me ask you this: why do you feel like the workflow stuff always starts with forms? Like, what is that idea?
Usually it's like the first step because you need the data to start the process. Let's say you are registering for an event, you're registering for a school, or you are requesting something from someone, right?
Right.
All these workflows, or maybe you're considering buying something, right? Yeah,
Yep.
there is just all these lead generation forms as well. It's like you make a request, and then if the request is kind of like difficult to understand, it's just there's just so much back and forth. But if the first step, if the data comes in structured way, like all the requested questions are filled, and you know who it is making the request. If you have all those information, then you can actually go much faster. And that's why I think forms are usually the first step when you are actually, especially when you're dealing with auto people. Like when you look at sectors like education,
Hmm.
healthcare, nonprofits, small businesses, like they have to deal with so many customers. And if you cannot kind of like streamline that data, that first step,
Hmm.
you're just gonna get lost in this like sea of information. But if you can turn that into like this streamlined forms, things like that, then it's just much easier to automate stuff and organize stuff.
Do you think that the companies that you're dealing with, whether again they're larger institutions, educational institutions, or even SMEs or SMPs, what I would do right now for a Pellegrino, by the way, um, do you think they understand as well that they have a keen understanding of the fact that like this form that they're generating at the beginning, at the top of the funnel, actually, if you allow me to say, is so key to automating the rest of their workflows because that's going to be the basis for their relationship with whether it's a student or somebody joining their company or some other relationship that they're going to have. Are they keenly aware of this as well, or is that something that they've learned over time by working with Jotforms?
I feel like people usually, they kind of they think forms as less like they just just a regular form, right? It's been
Yeah.
around for a long time,
Mm.
and 20 years ago we didn't have AI, at least not as we have.
No,
20 years ago we didn't have many of the technologies we have
no,
today,
no, no.
but we had forms. And even before like online forms, people used paper forms, and that's why it's been around for a long time, and people assume that it's not that important maybe. But when they actually start like trying to get stuff done, and if when they switch from not using form to a form, that's a huge step function. The same way, like people moving from like paper forms to like, I remember before the pandemic, like we actually signed stuff and faxed them, like
Facts,
like
I know.
today I don't think young people know what fax is,
No.
but we actually use them a lot. And then we would actually print out paper forms, fill them out, sign them, and then fax it to other people. And just there was no feedback. Like you would send something, if you would only receive something if there was an error, right? I hated faxes because I would never be sure if it worked or not.
So
But
Aytekin, I'm going to tell you something. There's nobody in the world that hates faxes more than I do, and I'll tell you why. I was sitting on a portfolio trading desk, and one day, with like 3 minutes to go before the market opened, we could not get our fixed technology, so the sort of electronic technology, to work back and forth to send the orders. But the fund manager really needed to get these trades done, and it was must have been like 100 and something names. They faxed it to me. So my buddy literally had to read out the stock codes, buy and sell, and share amounts. And we had to do it in 3 minutes. It was insane. And remember, a fax sometimes puts the same data at the end of the last page and beginning of the next page. But we couldn't dupe it. You know what I mean? So I hate faxes more than anybody because that day drove me almost crazy. Sorry, I interrupted you.
I mean, that's why AI is so magical, because
So
think about that. Like
tell me this
we
though.
had,
How is AI changing this stuff?
I mean, think about this. Like we were doing everything manually, like
Yeah,
printing
that
stuff,
day.
filling out, writing, handwriting, and then all that stuff. Now, like whatever I see, I take a picture, give it to ChatGPT, and then there comes out like all the information I need about that thing. Like, my kids play basketball. I see a good looking shoe. I take a picture of that, and then AI tells me where to buy, how much the price, what it is. Like, just incredible. Like,
Bad. But how is it changing the way teams design workflows? Do you know what I mean? Because that's the whole key of this, right? They get this form, they get some information, they understand what people want, but internally now, and you
yeah.
have a unique perspective here, right? Because your company is not born in the last 3 years; it was born 20 years ago. So you've seen this progression from, again, some artificial intelligence, probably mostly machine learning understanding of how to understand data, but now you're in a different world. How has it changed the way teams design and manage workflows?
I think there's a big shift today from this old way organizations, old way, the organizations companies worked, to a new way.
Yeah.
And in the old org structure, and we still have that org structure at Jotform. We have 800 employees. Like, there's me at the top, and then we have these like VPs and C level, and then we have middle management layer, and then we have all these individual contributors. We have teams with individual contributors, right?
Yep.
And this is kind of changing now. What's happening is that all those individual contributors, they're becoming by themselves like managers, because
Yeah.
now with the help of AI, they can actually they can all be turned into teams. Like they can be like teams, right? Let's take an example of our product teams. In our product teams, we have a designer, UX designer, and we have a front-end developer, back-end developer, maybe a product manager. But we have this small product team, like 6-person team.
Mhm.
And the reason they've been so successful is because they can actually make decisions and move quickly, and then move forward with their own decisions. But what's now happening is that instead of the 6-person team, now you can actually have like maybe 1-person or 2-person teams, where they can actually do everything themselves, because the designers can actually move faster, or developers can also like do the design. Like just they can go to cloud code design, places like that, and then they can actually do the design. And the front end development is kind of becoming less and less important, because actually AI can really write code so well. But the thing is, now we can actually move much faster, and like just these individual contributors are turned into teams. So this means our whole company is kind of changing, and the functions are changing, and the individual contributors are becoming so much empowered with AI that they can actually accomplish more. And like many people actually look at the negative side, like people assume that people are going to lose jobs, but I see the other way. Like you don't have
Same.
to reduce the headcount. You can actually do much more, and we were always growing, and then we will grow less. But the thing is, we are going to be accomplish more. But we are becoming much more productive, and the workflows those teams are accomplishing are actually becoming much faster, higher quality with the help of AI. Right? A designer who doesn't have to do doesn't have to do every single change themselves can now work with AI and iterate more and come up with much better designs. So I feel like everyone is going to become much more productive, and we are going to be able to accomplish much more. We are going to see, is like, especially for startup, if you're a startup, like, you don't have to hire a lot of people. Like, you can actually you can do so much with few number of people. So people assume, oh, people look at this and say, hey, there's going to be less people are going to be hired. But I actually look at the opposite. There's going to be like huge number of startups, because like you couldn't accomplish things because you couldn't, like, before, like, you didn't have the revenues, or you don't have the money to hire people. Now you don't actually need to hire so many people, so you can actually start on the cheap side. That means, like, instead of 10 startups, you can have hundreds of startups doing all kinds of things, and like just blooming. I think it's going to be incredible.
I don't disagree with you at all. As a matter of fact, I want to make 2 points that are going to agree with you. I'd much rather disagree with you, and that's kind of the other point that I want to make too. I could get way more attention on Twitter, way more attention on Facebook, like way more attention on YouTube or on TikTok if I was just like moaning and groaning and complaining about how this job apocalypse was going to happen. Way more people would pay attention to me. But I agree with you. I think people are just going to be reassigned. I've seen this before, and I keep saying this, but it gets me not enough attention because I'm not like screaming and my hair's not on fire. That's the first thing. And the second thing is the productivity thing. I completely understand because I see it manifest itself every single day in my own work. I am not a digital designer, and yet I make all the thumbnails for all of our episodes because artificial intelligence allows me to have a concept and to iterate around that concept until I come up with a design that I like. And that's me. So you're right. There are going to be hundreds of startups in a place where there may have been tens of them, because guys and gals that couldn't afford to hire 10 people can now do it in a different way, in a way that's way more productive and effective. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Can we talk a little bit about conversational forms, like what that really is and what that automation looks like in practice, actually?
Yeah. So we've been thinking about how we can actually change forms with the help of AI. And one thing that we really discovered was forms are great, but forms are kind of dumb. Forms cannot actually tell you, like, you're filling a form and then there's a question and then you wonder, like, how should I enter this question, right?
Yeah.
Or like, what should I do? Like, what should I buy? Or what should I, which option should I take, right? Like all those, questions, usually, like, when you're, especially if you're filling out a paper form, you are out of luck. You have to actually, call someone or something. Online, maybe you're gonna find the information, but you have to take the time, and people hate that. People hate, like, finding stuff.
I don't want friction when I do not want friction when I'm filling out a form. Yeah,
they don't have time to, like,
No.
research everything. But here's the thing: when you have a form that's also conversational, like, it can actually talk to you. You don't just talk to the form, like you don't just tell, okay, this is my name, this is my email address, right? You also start asking questions. You also start, like, talking about, like, and that form is actually turning into a sales agent, turning into, like, salesperson, turning into customer service person. And that's amazing because you don't waste time. Like, you just, whatever question you have. And I mean, we started using our AI agents in our own support. And today, like, 80% of our support at Jotform is handled by AI.
Interesting.
And we saw that this is possible.
That's fast, isn't it? Considering that, like, there weren't even really great agentic AI platforms until like January, February this year. So the fact that you've transitioned to 80% in the last, like, let's just say 3 or 4 months is kind of incredible, no?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, now our existing human support agents can just take over when someone says, okay, I want to talk to a real person, or if the AI agent cannot solve that problem over voice. And also, one of the things that our human customer service agents do is, like, they're actually watching over the AI. And then, and when they feel like our AI is not just doing customer support or sales, it's also doing, like, things for people. And our customer support people are actually can watch what's happening, and then they can help people when, there are problems, things like that, or improve our AI with the feedback the problems they see. But back to the conversational forms, what's happening is that, let's say there's this festival or something event, right?
Yep.
And people are just putting our conversational, AI forms, AI agents on their websites, Jotform AI agents on their website. And what's happening is that, like, people don't even read the website. They just go directly to the chat bot, and then they start asking questions like, where do I park my car? What's like, where can I buy this, concert or whatever? Just they are not even reading the website. And what's happening is that the AI agent is like actually taking the time to like read your website, learn about it, and sometimes even like, okay, people are asking about this question, like emailing you and asking you, like, people are asking about this question, but I couldn't find it on your website.
Right.
How should I answer these people? And then you email it back, and then it will just put that into the knowledge base, so that when people are filling out the forms or people are talking to the chatbot on your website, they will actually get the right answers. So it's just, and then you can also, like, if the AI agent fails, you can also have this, human in the loop, where you can actually talk to the people directly as well. But this is actually making customer support so much better. If you think about it, without AI, like, you call a phone line, especially like this is an event, right? It's just, there's this huge demand instantly. Something, people are asking the same questions like hundreds of times at the same time. And then the AI doesn't have that. Like, AI can scale as much as you want. Like, you can have hundreds of AI agents talking to humans at the same time, but you cannot scale phone. Someone is calling the phone line, and people are waiting half an hour, 45 minutes on the line, and they are angry, and they're just going to ask a simple question, but they cannot talk to a human person.
Right.
And uh, and and instead of that, right, you can talk to AI, and then the human can also still answer tougher questions like the AI cannot answer, but they are on the second level. So these kind of things are just making things so much easier, and people actually like talking to AI. That's what, like, I was thinking that, hey, people will not like talking to AI because
They
it's just,
do.
they will say like, give me a human, right? But the thing is, AI, you can talk to AI instantly. Like, that's huge improvement over
Yeah. Nobody wants to wait, right?
trying to wait for a human on the phone. Also, people actually like talking to AI because people are like, understand that they are talking to an AI. They give, they are more patient, and for some reason, they feel like, when you're talking to a human and then that person is giving you wrong answers, you get angry, right?
Right. But when you're talking
Because
to AI, like, who are you going to get angry at? There's no one to get angry at. In a way, it's
and
kind of
people
cool.
will actually talk more to AI because, people will feel like, okay, I'm taking the time of the other person. Maybe I should just cut quickly. But with AI, they ask all kinds of questions. Like, there's less, like, they are not worried about privacy. They can just ask anything because they are talking to, an AI at the other end. They will ask all the dumb questions because they are not worried about looking bad. So it's just, we found that people love it. And the great thing about AI is, like, every time they released a new model, like every time OpenAI releases a new model, our AI agent get better and better. Like,
Exactly.
they start working better and better over time. So that's what we discovered with forms and AI agents, and people love it.
That's awesome. Okay, Aytekin, I am going to let you go. This has been a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Okay, that was super interesting. Martin, let's bring let's bring Nisha in. Nisha Kohli, the Co-Chair ESG World Summit and Grid Awards at CorpStage. How are you doing this today? You can hear me okay, yeah? Awesome. Okay, look, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming to the show. We wanted to have you on because we wanted to talk about how AI-powered ESG platforms can help companies turn sustainability, governance, and compliance into measurable business execution. But before we do that, Tell us a little bit more about the World Summit and the Grid Awards.
Okay, so ESG World Summit and Grit Awards was conceptualized in 2022 when ESG was just evolving. So basically, we started this initiative to bring forward the companies which are doing great in ESG. I mean,
Mhm.
in terms of different frameworks, the reporting, etc., and also sustainable innovations. So this program actually span around large companies to even startups, which were contributing towards ESG and sustainability.
Got it. Can you tell us a little bit more about how since 2022, we're 4 years out, and you can go back further if you want, right? Because I'm sure you've been following this for longer than that. But just like how the perception, how the necessity to talk about ESG has changed over the last like 4 to 6 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And yeah, so ESG actually, if you really see the talk of it or the hype of it started towards when we were going through COVID
Yeah.
crisis.
Yeah.
That's where trillions of dollars were getting invested in ESG related funds.
Yep.
um, but the reporting etc which was preliminary voluntary and not mandatory, that started back in early 2010s and 2011s, that time when integrated reporting was introduced. Then 2015 came Paris Agreement, even more so with GRI related voluntary disclosures. But then later in 2022, when the ISSB, which is like IFRS in accounting standards, we
Yep.
have a sister concern of that ISSB, which launched IFRS S1 and S2 in 2023. That was formed in November 2020. That's
2020.
where,
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So November of 2020, we formed the board. All the different standards, they came together and they started first coming up with an interoperability, and then
Interesting.
finally they merged together. And 2023 is the time when ISSB was launched. That's where ESG standards and ESG reporting became mandatory and very serious for corporates. And even in Europe, CSRD, ESRS initiatives were launched around the same time, and it became mandatory. But last year was little, I would say, an impact on the ESG reporting was that it was narrowed down by the regulators. So Europe saw omnibus directive, which diluted, I would say, reduced the scope of reporting,
Yeah.
and ISSB was delayed in many jurisdictions.
So why did that happen?
Why did that happen? It's
Yeah.
because our economic financial situations. First of all, the tariff wars that happened, uh,
Mm.
and then later the geopolitical situations and supply chain obstructions and inflationary and economic situations of different countries. So that led to dilution of this mandatory standards.
Mm.
Uh, However, I do feel that even though the compliance has reduced or compliance has narrowed down, but the demand of ESG has not yet seen that, because banks are still pricing ESG risks into their portfolio. They are still charging. I mean, the cost of capital has the impact of ESG, and then bigger buyers and customers are still asking for ESG related data. So it's still there.
Where's the demand coming from that you're talking about?
So the demand is coming from, as I mentioned, mainly from three sides. First is regulator, which is narrowed down, of course,
Yep.
but the second one is the bankers and the institutional investors. They're still pricing ESG risks in their portfolio, the climate risks, etc., because they are themselves required by their own regulators or supervisors.
Got it.
And then thirdly, from the buyers, because in Europe, for example, there's an act called CBAM, which is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism,
Mhm.
which requires suppliers to report their carbon data, and that to verified carbon data. So there is a price attached to verification. If the supplier is able to provide audit ready data, then they are priced better.
Got it. Can I ask you this as well?
Hmm.
At the beginning, and again, I had an entire podcast about sustainability, which we
Yeah.
kind of folded into this one as well. So we keep talking about it.
Hmm.
And part of the reason why we folded it in was because fewer and fewer people were talking about it at scale. But
Hmm.
do you see the necessity for companies to think about ESG less of a reporting exercise, which is how it started, right? It's like, what are you doing in the context of ESG? Can you give us some reporting on it? Can we standardize that reporting? And now we're saying that that is kind of becoming a little bit thinner. But do we need to think about this as an operating discipline as opposed to just a reporting mechanism?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
So we call that as ESG infrastructure or ESG operating model. We never call it as a reporting tool for our platform, the CorpStage platform. It's called as a reporting tool. It's an operating model. So that's where ESG is also going. It's not about just reporting exercise, because as I just already talked about it, that the regulators are not asking that much. I mean, the large amount of data which was to be reported under CSRD or earlier related, GRI related voluntary, requirements, and rating agencies also, they were asking for so much of data. But now the volume is lesser. However, I would say more focus on the quality and deepening of the data. So the data quality, that is more important now.
Can I ask you this too? Has artificial intelligence and the ability of agentic AI to go out and get information and maybe synthesize that information, again, whether it's deterministic or probabilistic, I'm kind of indifferent, right? Because if there are facts, there are facts.
Yeah.
And if you ask an LLM, particularly in a very specific and targeted way, to go out and get a fact, it'll get that fact for you. It may not interpret it properly, but it can get a fact for you. What has been the implication there, not just from, again, the reporting perspective, but from this as an operational discipline as well, combining those two things together? What role has artificial intelligence played here, if any?
Yeah, so you're very right. Artificial intelligence can work like agents, which can go and get the data, extract it, classify it, and put it for different frameworks, or let's say for carbon accounting, it can put it under different scopes, etc.
Yep.
And as in our platform, we have deterministic models. We don't rely on AI computed data. So it has to be very much, activity data times, for example, for carbon footprint, it should be activity data multiplied by versioned emission factors. Now, the role of AI in this is that when it comes to activity data, it should be, it can go and fetch the data from different documents. It could be utility bill, PDF, or it could be from the ERP, it could be from a folder which is there in your Google Drive, etc. So you bring in that data, you extract it, classify it, put it in the calculator, and then there is the top layer is human oversight. So we don't allow AI to make judgments. We actually use AI to do our work, and then human oversight is the most important layer, which confirms and approves the data.
Got it. How would you suggest, or how would you characterize what I would call corporate or sort of institutional momentum in the ESG space? And again, just getting back to the AI thing, has it made it easier for them to do this and more efficient, so for them at scale to be able to implement all these things that they might have been slightly more expensive than they wanted it to be 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So AI has made things very, very affordable. A couple of days back, I was interacting with an association owner of SMEs, and she was mentioning to me that SMEs are using LLMs to do their ESG reports. However, they are doing it on at their own way, or at their own risk, I would say. But AI has definitely made things affordable. So earlier that was the privilege of large companies or large organizations such as banks and pharma companies, etc., who could spend millions or hundreds and thousands of dollars in ESG, hiring consultants and doing the work for them. But now even small companies don't have to go for big fours to develop ESG or audit-ready ESG data.
Do you think there are companies out there, specifically in the SME space, but also in the sort of larger institutional space as well, that I wouldn't say resisted per se, but didn't prioritize ESG reporting for whatever reason, or making it part of their sort of operational expertise? But now, again, because artificial intelligence there, because it's become easier, they're just like, we can do this now, and we couldn't do it before.
Of course, for a long time, ESG was considered as a cost center, and even today also it is, because people look at from the compliance angle. So anything which is a regulation, which is a compliance, or I would say a checkbox exercise, becomes a cost center. But now with AI, what we can do is, and what is more important also for companies, is financial layer. So with AI, a lot of financial intelligence and ESG intelligence can be built, which can help companies to create value out of ESG. So it's not just a reporting exercise anymore.
And do you think there are ancillary benefits as well, or maybe I should say supplementary benefits, where a company goes through and does all this ESG reporting, they make it part of their operational expertise, and then they realize, wait a second, there's actually a financial benefit to us for doing this, and then maybe they can apply some of those principles to the rest of their businesses as well, and think there's actually a way for us to do this and make money, as opposed to just turn it into a cost center, as you suggested earlier.
Absolutely, this is possible, but the unfortunate part is there that today the gap exists where companies do not integrate ESG data with financial data.
Go ahead.
Which is very much missing even in the largest of the companies. The requirement, of course, is there as per ISSB, the regulation. It requires the integration of annual financial annual report with ESG report.
I would think so.
However, still, companies are struggling with integrating financial data with ESG data. That's where we are seeing the role of emergence or evolution of the role of ESG controller, who can work in the organization as a cross-functional person, integrating or making a bridge between ESG and finance. And also, like in the platform, in the technology space, our platform provides the financial intelligence layer where we show the impact on EBITDA, impact on the balance sheet, etc.
So do you think it's going to be more likely going forward? Because a lot of the conversations that I have, and you'll see, I'll continue the thought actually. But do you think that going forward, there's more of a likelihood that that data that you're talking about that's only ESG related is going to get integrated into the financial data again? Because in the old days, before agentic AI, all the data, not all, but a lot of data was siloed. Like this department needs this data, this department needs that data. But for agentic AI to actually work in a way that's efficient and effective, it potentially needs to have better context, and better context means better data or better data access, at least if it's governed in the right way. Do you see this as maybe an impetus to say, if we're going to integrate the ESG data into the rest of our data stack as well, that maybe we need to then rethink the way all of our data is organized so we can have better outcomes across the board, not just in the ESG space?
Yeah, I would say it works both ways, integrating ESG data with financial data and financial data with ESG data. Both should be there. And just to give you an example, ESG data with financial data is there, whenever you're making product and you're making product decisions or market decisions, you integrate ESG to understand which market, which product will have a lower carbon footprint, more acceptability by customers. And on the other hand, if you bring financial data over ESG, then you can calculate your efficiency savings and, maybe impact on valuation, on the enterprise value overall. Yeah, that is possible. The company should do both ways.
Do you think the companies that become more ESG compliant end up having their valuations higher or lower on average?
Depends on what ESG compliant means to them. If it is a checkbox exercise, then checkbox exercise doesn't make companies resilient or doesn't make them, valuable. Yeah.
Can we make the case as well that anything that ends up being sort of a checkbox exercise is actually not going to be productive or additive to enterprise value? Does that make sense? So it's not just, I don't want to just put that in the context of ESG. I think it's the case that if you're just doing anything as a checkbox thing, it's not going to add to enterprise value. Is that fair?
It may do for a short term, but in long run, people will have to show the evidence, which happened, when I was doing PhD at that time. Satyam Computers was one of the companies which got 3 years in a row corporate governance award, but they were the that company failed with employees laid over, like 28,000 employees were laid over, and
oh no,
huge manipulation of accounts and fraud case.
So how do you balance this though, right? How do you balance this idea of, we know we need to do these things, so we need to have some sort of checkbox capability to say that we've actually accomplished and done these things, but then build it into sort of the deeper strategy around not just sustainability, but financial viability as well? How do you balance those things?
So we follow the strategic roadmap and then integrating it, as I said initially also, that we follow ESG operating model. That's what we provide, and that makes integration very easy. In a I would say 3-4 years before, companies were fearing that they will have to establish sustainability teams, expensive sustainability teams with 10 to 12 people, etc. But now they don't have to, because there is no need of sustainability department. It's an
Right.
integrated. Everybody has to have to have a mindset of sustainability and ESG in this organization.
Are there any other emerging technology parts of this that come into ESG that we haven't already discussed besides artificial intelligence? You know what I mean? Like in the old days, there was all this talk around like all the data going onto a blockchain or something. Is that still something that people talk about or not really?
Yeah, so we also started with blockchain layer. We wanted to put the carbon emissions on the blockchain layer. I mean, a lot of people, they do carbon credits and offset on the layer, but we wanted to put emissions so that we can get the net zero status, public emissions data. But now we are not talking about that anymore, because it hammers the like it's like a cost for the company to build that chain. So what we are doing is we are fingerprinting all the documents or evidence that company uploads by using cryptographic hashgraph technology.
Okay. And where does that come in handy though? Like if you're still doing that, where does it come in handy in this? Is it just the reporting stuff? Does it get back to the integration of the finances stuff? Like where does it come in handy?
It's coming handy for traceability and proving the credibility. So now
For
even
like supply chain stuff.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
not just that,
Not
even
just that.
making the reporting audit ready, because even though the number of KPIs to be reported under ESG have reduced, but
Right.
auditability is still there.
And do you
So
think this is something that's cyclical? In other words, we did talk a little bit about the reduction of the necessity, maybe a certain number of details like has been reduced. But is this cyclical? Do you think we get back to a point where this becomes actually more prominent and becomes more important again?
yes, definitely, it'll happen.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm going to thank you so much for coming and doing this today. That's the fastest 20 minutes of my life. I really appreciate it. And you were an awesome guest. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you for this. Thank you.
It
For
is my complete pleasure.
Bye.
Okay, while we wait for our next guest, I just want to cover a little bit more of our original story today. I want to talk a little bit more about Sarvam, if that's okay with everybody, while we wait for our next group of guests to come in. We talked about how for Sarvam that sovereign AI was actually going to be really important. The question is though, like, how does this actually end up being a real business model and not just something that people say? Right? Because we've spent a lot of time about data sovereignty and AI data sovereignty and all this other stuff in the context of Europe and the United States and in other parts of Asia as well. But the idea here is that it's not just a made in India thing. It is controlled in India. It's deployable in India. It's compliant and it's cost effective. The company says its systems, and I think this is actually really interesting as well, can run in a private cloud. It can run on-prem. It can run hybrid, or it can run anywhere that banks, insurers, and public sector bodies and other regulated industries needed to run. And that's actually really important, particularly in the context of India. And here's the other thing too. The HCLTech investment specifically points to this idea of sovereign AI solutions for governments and regulated industries. This is the thing you really have to keep in mind actually when you're thinking about this, because that's going to be the key here. Remember I said earlier in our initial discussion for this segment that India itself is so diverse from a language, from a culture, from a food perspective. It also means it's going to be really different in the way the government looks at implementing artificial intelligence, not just in its corporate and institutional sector, but in the government sector as well. And I think that's actually going to be really, really important. The business model in this case most likely comes from enterprise deployment, government use cases, and the language stuff actually becomes super duper important, right? Because if you just think about voice agents, we've talked about this in the West, we've talked about this in the context of the United States. A voice agent in the United States is actually relatively, and I always talk in relative terms, relatively easy to implement. And why is that? Well, one, it's pretty standardized English in the United States. And while there are some sort of dialectical problems in the sense that maybe in the accent in South Carolina is different potentially than the accent in Boston. At the end of the day, a lot of the word choices, a lot, like in the 90% is going to be the same. So implementing voice agents and all that other stuff is going to be the same too. The other thing as well is that the document and the workflows there are going to be very, very similar as well, right? So if if an insurance company or if a bank is, and in this day and age, with the consolidation that's taken place in the financial services industry at scale, but also sort of for big companies like Amazon, the workflows in the US are going to be the same everywhere in the country. And all of the technology is going to be on the same par across the entire country. India is going to be very different in that sense. Your first tier cities and second tier cities, and again, the founders and the institutional investors that I speak to in India will always tell you that what's taking place in first tier and second tier cities is different than it is in third tier and fourth tier cities. And none of it is bad. They're not making a value judgment. All they're trying to explain and tell you is that they're different. And because of those differences, there's going to have to be adaptability, and that adaptability is going to have to get built in to these foundational models actually that get built in India, so that the artificial intelligence again can be in India for India, right? And that model infrastructure is going to have to be customized potentially in the different states, in the different cities, and in the different tiers of cities in India to ensure that there's not just going to be this sort of generic consumer chatbot activity that happens there, that it's going to be much more nuanced. Okay. Now, the other thing we have to understand as well, some of the big companies, and we've mentioned this before, we've mentioned this earlier, excuse me, have worked with Sarvam to be able to ensure that like they get all the benefits of the work that Sarvam has done in India for India, but that now that Microsoft and Google DeepMind has highlighted this stuff and said that we want to be able to work with it, and use that stuff as well, not just note that Sarvam is actually using their technology or some of their technology to understand and to build some of these changes here. And the key as well, we talked a little bit earlier about distribution and how HCLTech is now a strategic investor in Sarvam. And again, one of the reasons why this is so important is just we kind of looped out of this conversation earlier, but go back to the way that we know that companies like Anthropic and companies like OpenAI have decided that they want to do their distribution. Competition for the LLMs is actually beginning to be very fierce. And now, remember, even though ChatGPT 5.5, and Mythos or Fable 5 was not built specifically for India, they're still going to try to compete in India as well. So the competition just keeps getting heavier and heavier. And this whole idea, we talked about this too, because of the forward deployed engineers, you're probably going to see a situation where, again, no more job apocalypse in my mind, but imagine what's going to have to happen in a country like India, where, as I said, you go 100 miles away from a specific city, you could have a different language, different culture, and different food. It's also going to mean you're going to have different workflows and different implementations of the way that artificial intelligence is going to get used. The local governments are going to use it different than the national government. The local companies are going to use it different than the national companies. All of this is going to be different. And because of that, they're probably going to have to hire more people. Again, a company like HCLTech, right, probably has a bunch of service people because they do a ton of distribution, and it's not just them. There are going to be other companies that are similar that have large consumer and large enterprise distribution, and they are also going to get used to be able to do this. To be able to do this distribution for a company like Sarvam as well. But also think about what it means, again, like I said, from a job and a job deployment perspective. You're going to have a lot of companies needing a lot of people to explain and to sort of handhold and guide some of these Indian SMEs and SMBs into how they're going to use this artificial intelligence technology. And that is going to become key as well. The other thing is, how does it get audited? Right? In other words, one of the things that people want to understand when they're using these large LLMs, particularly in India, is it auditable? And what is the latency that's associated with it? How do we know exactly what it's going to do? And how do we know what the nuances are so that we can explain them to, our customers in Delhi or our customers in Gurgaon or our customers in Hyderabad, like all these places are going to need different requirements, and they're all going to need to have sort of different explanations for how all this stuff is working. Let's do a little bit more on this, right? Again, if you think about just to dig a little bit deeper into the sort of language stuff here, we said that there were 22 sort of accepted or officially prescribed languages in India, but there are many more. Right? You could get up to over 100 languages. As I said earlier, everybody that I know that's in India, they have conversations with me and they tell me that they're speaking or at least understanding at least 4 languages each. Right? Like one from their mother's side of the family, one from their dad's side of the family, one which is the national language, which is Hindi, and the other one which is English. So imagine the level of complexity that this stuff is actually bringing in when you're building a sort of when you're building an AI model. Okay, let's get a little bit of feedback from Martin on where we stand with our guests. What do we okay, but what do we do about timing? Okay. Okay. It's gonna be hard, but I will do the best I can. I have an idea. Don't worry about it. I have yeah, I have an idea. Don't worry. There's plenty of news to talk about in Asia. Plenty. So I wanted to cover something else today. Now that we have a little bit more time, let's get to this. This I thought was actually kind of interesting. Um, do you may remember as an audience that we talked before about how Meta bought Manus, and there was a whole hullabaloo, a whole big story around like you need to mute that again. Thank you. Around how Meta bought Manus, they'd actually integrated some of the people from Manus into their thing. The Manus team had actually moved their domicile from China into Singapore, and the Chinese government was not happy about this. And Meta was just like, we really want to buy this company. They paid $2 billion for it. Okay. But this is so interesting because then the Chinese government came out and they were like, yeah, that's not going to happen. We're not going to allow this, like something that's so important to our national sovereignty, so much development done by like a valid Chinese team. And we're not just going to let it get bought by a company in the United States. But unwinding this is going to be hard. So the Chinese government actually wanted this thing unwound. Martin, maybe we do him at the end. So, as I was saying, some of these early Chinese investors in Manus, the Singapore-based sort of Chinese, this startup that I've been talking about, they're reportedly looking to buy this thing back from Meta, which I thought was actually super interesting. Right. The important point here, it's not just like the reversal of this deal. It's that the AI talent, the model IP, and the data flows, and where like a company is really from, are becoming national security issues. We saw this in the United States as well, right? Because we saw, Anthropic release their Fable 5 model and Mythos to companies, and the US government said, yeah, you got to take that down. So imagine the Chinese government doing the same thing. And I thought that was really interesting. So Reuters is also reporting that Manus's revenue run rate had jumped from about 100 million to 4 to 500 million, which makes this force separation even more sort of strategically meaningful. I think this is actually super duper interesting um, from a Chinese and even from a slightly um, geographical perspective. But I do think it's kind of cool that some of the company's original investors have decided now that they may wanna buy this thing back. I thought that was, like, super, super interesting, right? We can bring in Damien whenever you want. Um, Let's do a little more news in Asia before we welcome one of our next guests. We mentioned earlier, like a week ago, that DeepSeek had reportedly done a 7.4 have done like a $7.4 billion raise at a valuation of $50 billion. It's like one of the biggest stories that we've seen in Asia. And we did say as well that the structure was the story here because Liang Wenfeng wanted to maintain like most of the sort of voting rights here. And that the people that were investing in the company got a 5-year lockup. Martin, I can still hear you. Yeah. And strategic backers for this deal included Tencent and CATL. The idea here is that DeepSeek is now China's most valuable AI startup and the sort of face of everybody that's involved in this deal. And I think that's actually going to be super important too. And DeepSeek is not going to go away. They're just going to get bigger and stronger and more powerful as well. I am ready as well. Okay, we are going to welcome our next guest, and that is Damien Wong, Senior Vice President, APAC at Tricentis. Damien, you can hear me okay? I can, and I love your background. It looks very professional and very great. Let's bring you into the main room for the rest of this recording. There you are. Okay, Damien Wong, Senior VP, APAC at Tricentis. We wanted to have you on the show to talk about how agentic quality engineering is going to help enterprises move faster.
Sure.
Without potentially losing control of like their environment there. And before we do that, maybe tell our listeners and our viewers a little bit more about Tricentis, and then we'll jump into this thing.
Sure. You've already introduced me, Damien Wong, Senior Vice President for APAC at Tricentis. I've been with the company for over 4 years, with the enterprise technology industry for over 30 years now.
Super.
Tricentis is the leading global enterprise software company that focuses on helping organizations, drive quality at speed. And we do it with the help of an AI-powered quality engineering platform. So in summary, that's what we do. We're recognized by leading global analysts as the leader in this space as well. So organizations like Gartner, Forrester, IDC regard us as a leader, and we work with over 3,000 of the largest organizations in the world to help them in this space.
You want to dig a little bit deeper into quality engineering so people have a little bit better understanding about what we're talking about?
Sure. I think when we talk about quality engineering, we're talking about software quality engineering. And this is related to building software or applications that organizations use to run their businesses, whether it's to engage internal stakeholders or external stakeholders like customers and suppliers and the likes of those, right? So from that perspective, quality is very important because when you use a piece of software, you expect it to perform and to also do what it's supposed to do. And when it doesn't, it's really not a good situation. So
no, it's highly problematic.
Well, yeah, and you often end up with very poor situations. In some worst case scenarios, you end up on the front pages of newspapers for the wrong reasons, right? And that's something that I think organizations work very hard at trying to avoid.
Yeah, so one of the things that I learned when I was at Goldman Sachs, actually one of the policies at Goldman Sachs was something they called the Wall Street Journal test. Mm-hmm. They didn't want any of their employees to ever end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and it was just a metaphor for exactly what you're talking about. 100%. We don't want anything that we do to end up being a news story that's not been approved. You know what I mean? And that's exactly what you're suggesting here. Where is, from your perspective and from Tricentis' perspective, like where is agentic automation headed in enterprise environments, and how does sort of quality engineering help people accomplish this?
Sure, and it's a great question, right? If you think about agentic automation, it's being bandied about by a lot of people. I think we've evolved in the use of AI from what I would call co-pilots, right? Technology that helps you with acting as a co-pilot to what you're trying to achieve, providing advice, recommendations, etc., to agentic systems which actually execute certain instructions, do certain tasks for and on your behalf. Thereby, the term agentic, right? It's agentic in how it's trying to support you or do what you need to do. I think the thing that we're seeing is that the adoption of AI is no longer in question, as in that most organizations have actually been very much forthcoming in wanting to adopt AI. So it's not about organizations not wanting to adopt AI. What we're seeing is that organizations are adopting AI, but then in this new world that we're in, right? Then also being impacted by some of the I would say the consequences of adopting AI without some of the right governance frameworks and capabilities and so on. So as an example, we see many organizations talking about how they're accelerating software development using agentic AI. And that is, I think, something that many organizations are keen to do. But at the same time, right, we also know that organizations who have been using agentic AI capabilities to develop software for and on their behalf have realized that these capabilities do not come with perfection, right? There are risks involved with them, and the code that comes out oftentimes is buggy. It's because oftentimes it requires good context in order for those agentic capabilities to operate well. And humans don't often provide very good context, right?
No, they're terrible at it.
Yeah, that's the issue that we see. And I think that is also where, it becomes a little bit of a challenge for organizations wanting to leverage this. So in our latest 2026 Quality Transformation Report, where we surveyed over 2,500, practitioners, decision makers around the world, it was clear that, organizations were being pressed to drive speed to market with developing software using AI and so on, and at the cost of sometimes cutting corners and deploying untested code, right? So 60% of the respondents actually said that they deploy untested code.
Oh no!
Yeah, which is, if you think about it, that is actually a recipe for disaster. Yeah,
disaster. Yeah. I mean, we never, when I was at Goldman Sachs, or even at Morgan Stanley, we never, ever, I mean, I can say ever a million times, and it still won't be enough times to say, like, we never, ever released untested code.
Not a good idea, right?
No, terrible. It's the worst idea, actually.
Oh, it's you've seen some examples in recent times where organizations have actually done that. Is sometimes we laugh about it. It's testing in production, right? So we saw the CrowdStrike outage that was a result of code that wasn't completely tested before it was released, and the impact of that. And there are so many other examples of that happening. We think that this is a high risk for many organizations because, we obviously are seeing that software is the business today, right? Many organizations are powered by software at the core.
Sure.
And if they are not rolling out new innovation with software faster than their competitors, then obviously they are, at risk of being out competed by their peers.
Yeah.
I think this whole conundrum of quality and speed. Like, do we need to compromise one for the other? That's the dilemma. But our belief is that you don't have to. You should be able to drive quality at speed, right? And this is our philosophy.
Can you talk to me about the shift that you're seeing in quality engineering from, let's just say, non-AI related quality engineering to AI related? Because there's this whole conversation out there about an AI bubble. And let me just run through this for you for a moment, if you don't mind.
Of course, absolutely. I think in the past, what we would do is that when we build software, we would then put it through some form of validation and testing before we roll it out, right? In the early days, we would do it manually. And then came along ways in which we could automate the testing, right? And as enterprise technology environments became more complex, highly integrated, and you had to deal with many more variables that were changing all the time. Manually doing it was probably going to be a very difficult thing to achieve. So So automating it, adopting new capabilities that allowed you to continuously test really became more and more commonplace, and that's where Tricentis actually excelled, right?
Sure.
Helping customers do that. But then what we have is we have these capabilities that require people to operate it, right? You build automated test cases, and then you use them to and you apply them, but you still have the need for humans to be able to do this. It's like driving a car, right? You still need a human to operate a car. But what if you could have an autonomous capability that allowed the car to drive itself, right? And that would speed things up, because then you would have a virtual team of perhaps test engineers that can augment your physical team, and virtual agents don't need to eat or sleep, so they can operate 24/7 and do this a lot.
But isn't it a bit of a double-edged sword, though, right? This 24/7 operation, and part of it is that, again, if you want to get back to the autonomous car thing, like if the autonomous car has an accident, who's responsible, right? Who's held accountable? But the second thing is, even from a software perspective, if it's operating 24/7, the human that's meant to be monitoring it, because at some level this has to be a human that's accountable for it, that human's not working 24/7.
Yes.
And there may be a case, again, because of imperfections in the way the agents are built, that the agents are doing things while you're sleeping that are things that maybe you wouldn't want them to do.
100%, and that's where the trust deficit comes in, right?
Go ahead.
It's an interesting observation. It's also something that's keeping a lot of organizations up at night, right? You do have AI, and the question is, you want to give it some form of autonomy, but at the same time, you know that you need a human in loop because of those questions around who is liable, right? Can you just turn around and blame the AI if something went wrong? I don't think you can, right? And I think this is where we all have to understand that you can only go as fast as the governance frameworks allow you to. So it's like a high performance vehicle, right? You can only go as fast as your brakes will allow you to.
Yeah.
Right, so you do have to have good brakes, right? And I think this is where, even though the capabilities can operate autonomously 24/7, you do need to build in governance frameworks that allow you to put checks in there. That does not mean that people do not remain liable and accountable for it. You need to have audit trails, you need to have governance, you need to have observability, and you need to build quality right from the get-go, not have it as an afterthought, which I think has been the traditional approach that many organizations use to abide by.
Yeah.
So I think all those things actually help balance between like the speed versus the quality, and the use of AI and the governance and trust that's required to use AI and scale AI in a meaningful way.
How would you characterize Tricentis' clients, and even some of the ones that maybe don't work directly with you, in the scale with which they're implementing agentic AI across their enterprises? And what does it make your quality engineering practice look like?
Sure, and then again, it's another good question, right? And I would probably also refer to the quality transformation report that we just published, right?
Yep.
This is the latest version, right? And some of the findings that we're seeing are also trending from what we've done in our report last year. But it does show that that there is a bit of a trust deficit or trust gap that's developing within organizations. Executives, decision makers have a higher level of trust in agentic automation or agentic AI as compared to practitioners. So people who are actually developing the software and testing the software and so forth. They are at the cold phase, and they see a lot of complexities and risks, right? So they have a much lower level of trust and confidence in autonomous systems at this point in time. So we're already seeing that happening. But then the question is, does that mean that you ignore the capabilities that are being brought to market? I think it's difficult to ignore those, because we've also seen that with these capabilities, you are able to drive speed to market, right? In terms of additional software innovation, you can roll out in a much faster time. So I think the way to do it is it's not one thing or the other. It's not like using AI and going all in without thinking of the governance and ensuring that it is still tested before you roll it out. It's also just making sure that as you go through this, you have a very clear understanding of how you are going to govern and ensure trust in all the development processes that you have when you are rolling out innovation, right? So if you don't do that, then the obvious issue is you're going to lose money as a result of poor software quality, right?
Sure.
In the report, it was about half of those that responded said that they lose between $500,000 to $5 million annually just because of poor software quality. So
when you say poor software quality and losing between $500,000 to $1 million a year, are you suggesting then that the automated code, that the agentic AI generated code that's getting written is actually costing institutions, enterprises, SMEs money because the code that it's generating is either A, untested, or B, just coming out bad and then just getting thrown and doing, like as you said, live testing?
And that's something that we're saying, right?
Yep.
We're talking about all the innovation that's coming out, software innovation that's coming out, and obviously the implications of the report and the research that we have is showing that is becoming a bit of a catalyst for driving this, because there's a lot more code that's being pushed out, right? And people are actually seeing bigger losses as a result of the poor quality code, right? And this is coupled by the findings that a lot of people who are actually pushing out untested code, right? Into production. So these factors are all correlated, and our view is very simple, right? You can't ignore AI. AI, I think, is here to stay, right?
For sure.
Yeah, and we're going to have to take advantage of what AI brings to the table. But then how do you then ensure that trust is maintained? Because those organizations that can build trust into their software development processes, right? And ensure that it is good software that's being rolled out are the ones that are going to be winners in today's AI-driven world.
How much autonomy it gets? Sorry, let me just rephrase this.
Mm-hmm.
How autonomous do you think that enterprises want their agents to be, kind of on average or across the board, when they talk to you about doing quality engineering reviews on the agents that they're building? And is it just agents that are doing customer service? Is it agents that are writing software? Like, can you sort of characterize that as well? Because for my money, like, I don't want anything to be 100% autonomous, because I don't even trust me to be 100% autonomous, if you know what I mean. So how much autonomy do they want? Do they expect? Are they projecting to you they're going to need to actually create the right level of software development that they're talking to you and Tricentis about?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? It depends on the organizations that
Sure.
I've spoken to. And I think there is a desire overall to have higher levels of autonomy with agentic capabilities, because by having that, right, by being able to scale the trust that you have in some of these autonomous capabilities,
Sure.
the more you can drive productivity. And I think this is the view, right? Eventually, do we still need humans in the loop? At this time, it absolutely is important, right? You don't have a case where folks are saying that you can operate everything without humans in the loop. Now, where we are trying to balance this is the fact that, on the one hand, you already have all these people who are using these techniques like vibe coding, etc., to roll out all the software in a very rapid way, right? And the bottleneck really is, how do you ensure that you can keep up with validating that code, ensuring that it is safe, it is secure, it does what it's supposed to do, it performs as expected, right, before you roll it out. So that really is, in our world, what we are trying to help achieve, right? It's just as I mentioned earlier, the proverbial brakes, right? We want to provide the best brakes so that the organization can go as fast as the brakes will allow you to go safely and securely. So I would say that we are all aspiring for higher levels of autonomy, right? And I think that is a fine, delicate balance that we are all trying to work towards today. One thing's for sure, we cannot ignore it, so we have to continue to work at it and ensure that we are at the forefront of it, which is what Tricentis is doing. We just focus on AI-powered software quality engineering, and that is also taking into account what our customers are telling us. that they need, right? That they are also focused on in order to help them become more successful. Yeah, Michael, I hope that helps.
No, it does. Is there? Am I the only one who wants to have a different sort of word for vibe coding?
Well, people have used different terms for that.
But you know what I mean? It's not just you. I'm just having a conversation with you, but it's like vibe coding sounds something you do at like 11:30 at night after you've come home from a club. You're just like, I'm just going to vibe code this thing, as opposed to democratization of writing code for people that may not be software engineers. Kind of sounds like a better way to address this. No,
it's a mouthful.
I know it's a mouthful. Maybe I'm not good at catchy phrases, although I think I am. And I think given the right amount of time, I could come up with a better term for this. But you understand the point, right? Because that's what people are saying. When we talk about vibe coding, we're not talking about just like vibing it. We're talking about like, okay, here's the thing that I want to do. Here's the thing that I want to accomplish. I've actually architected it out exactly the way I want it. And now I'm going to ask Codex to do it, or Claude Opus 4.8, or Fable 5 to do it for me. It's a longer thing to say, and it doesn't sound nearly as cool. Like maybe my hair has to be shorter to be able to do it that way, as opposed to having a ponytail. But you understand the point, right? Like it's a bad term, no?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a catchy term, right? And I think it came from the fact, I feel the vibe, and this is what I'm going to go with. Right?
Yeah, I get it, but that's not the way it happens. So, what another thing for you?
Yeah.
Do you feel like, because I think in all cases that like untested code should never be released.
Mm-hmm.
I just feel this, right? It's like you would never release, even if there were no regulations, you'd never release like an airplane or a car or a rocket that's not been tested. You know what I mean? Because people can die. I'm not 100%. Suggesting to you that code can kill people, but I'm not suggesting that it can't either. But the point is this, is that isn't there a way to create some sort of real-time continuous testing on code
100%.
So that prior to it getting rolled out into production, it kind of gets tested on the fly, if you know what I mean, before it hits sort of the production servers?
Yes, and you're actually, talking about a trend that we call quality intelligence, right? Just knowing what needs to be tested, what has been tested, and then being able to respond to that, right? So I think this is where Tricentis has actually been at the forefront, because we use intelligent capabilities to detect what software is being changed within an organization. And we then have the understanding of what actually has been tested or not, and then being able to determine what's the risk of this software being released, right? If we were to put it through. So as part of the change and software change and release management processes, being able to have good quality intelligence allows us to then ensure that no code is actually released into production without us knowing what tests have been run, if any. And if there are tests that should have been run, but they haven't, then the next step is obviously, can we autonomously create those tests, those automated tests that allow you to test it and come up with results, whether it's good enough, whether it meets the requirements that are defined, and so on. So that actually is something that we feel is important, because it's in our world, it's not one thing or another, Michael. It's actually all of those things, right? You don't just test whether it works. You test whether it's safe. You test whether it performs, whether the data is correct. So we believe that with the software platform that we have, we allow you to take that software and take it through all these different, checks that are needed, and put agents on top of that, so that if you elect to do so, the agents can do this on your behalf, right? And come back to you and say that, it's gone through all these checks, it passes all the checks, and you can confidently put it through. So I think that's really what we are trying to do, right? We're trying to put the power of this in the hands of our customers, so that they're never in a situation where code is released without them knowing, right? And in today's world, unfortunately, as what the research that we have says, 60% of today's organizations actually put out untested code. Yeah.
Okay. I want to ask another question, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Isn't there a way to create a sort of systemic process that says, because if people understand like the way software is actually developed, it's not just a bunch of wise guys or wise gals in a room just like developing stuff and throwing it out into production. They literally need to like check the code out. They need to log into the server. They need to do like real specific things to actually get this done. And isn't there a way for an agent to sort of monitor all these little processes And when someone tries to send it to production, just go, yeah, nice try, Bob. But like that thing's not going out. And I know what people will argue. Well, what if it's like mission critical and the thing needs to go out right away? That's an edge condition. I can argue with you. I can make the case to you that that's an edge condition. But isn't there a way to automate kind of all of these processes and just go, if somebody even just like checks out a file, that the agentic AI would know about it and say, and be on the watch then for saying, okay, it has no tag on it that says it's ever been tested. So I just simply will not let this thing get released into production until somebody overrides. Do you know what I mean? And I'm simplifying it to make a point, but you understand the point, right?
I do, and you know, again, like I said, you've read the thing from what I was thinking, right? We do have capabilities around that, Michael, right? It might sound like magic, but we actually bought a company called Sea Lights a couple of years ago, and Sea Lights does exactly that. It does not wait for someone to tell it that a piece of code has been changed. It actually listens out intelligently for what code has changed, and then it listens out intelligently for what tests have been run without people, you know, having to tell it, right? And based on that, you can then put the correlation of like, you know, these pieces of code have not been tested. You know, it might be a piece of API code that you've made a change to, and you haven't run an API test on it, and we listen out for this, and we realize that that's the case. So then we will ensure that, you know, if you decide to put it through, you're not doing it because you didn't know about it and it was unwittingly released, right? You know, it was a case of you did know about it and you did say that that's fine, and we're prepared to take the risk to release that. So hopefully with capabilities like this, we'll never be in a situation where code gets released, code gets built, changed, and released without the right level of testing and validation.
Got it.
And if you do have to do something, you know, under an emergency case or whatever, right, you're doing it knowingly. You're not being surprised by someone actually rolling it out without your knowledge. Hopefully that helps.
Perfect. Okay. Damien, Wong, I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this today. I really appreciate it. Fascinating stuff. Thank you again. Okay, Martin, let's bring Patrick in, Patrick Tobler, founder at Masumi. Patrick, how are you? I am super duper. You can hear me okay, yeah?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Look, Patrick, thank you so much for coming and doing this today. We wanted to talk to you about how decentralized agent infrastructure may help businesses build trusted, interoperable, and commercially useful AI systems. Tell us a little bit about Masumi first before we dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So Masumi is an agent-to-agent payment network. So the idea is really that we believe there will be billions of different agents that all have to interact with each other from different companies. And then there's a lot of problems to be solved. And the main one being, how do they actually transfer money from one agent to another agent? And if you really think about billions of agents, you quickly come to the conclusion that credit cards or bank accounts are not really the perfect solution. So we said, okay, crypto is actually perfect for that. We can just spin up wallets for those agents. And that's what we're doing with Masumi.
Got it. So why is crypto the perfect place to have agentic payments? Dig a little bit deeper into that. I know you said we'll just give them a wallet and stuff like that, and that makes sense. And look, if you go back and look at a conversation that I had at Super AI with Yatsu, I'm sure you've heard of Yat, yeah?
Yeah, of course. He's great.
Yeah, he's super great. And it was the first time we met in person, so that was kind of exciting for me. But one of the things he said to me, and I'm curious about your opinion on this, and then your deeper opinion on why this is necessary for to make agentic payments real, but he was like, crypto was invented and it wasn't invented for humans. It was invented for machines. And we had to wait until agentic AI came out to actually make that dream become a reality. Why did we have to wait for, from your perspective, why was crypto not created for human interaction, but for machine to machine interaction? And how does agentic AI make this not just solvable, but desirable?
It's very funny that he said that, because that's actually also something I say a lot, that I think that we built crypto for the wrong target audience, because we built it for...
I'll give you that for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, but but now with agents, I mean, if you really look at the whole agentic landscape, there's just a few problems that arise that that are basically already solved with crypto, and I try to focus on just 4 core issues. One of
Go ahead.
them, as I mentioned already, being payments.
Mhm.
Yeah, but the other one also being identity. You know, one of the main recurring themes is like, how can I trust the agent to actually be the agent that it says it is? Because
Yeah.
if I just launch an agent and I pretend to be someone else, and your agent trusts my agent and sends money there, that might become a real issue. So we need identity. And then the third issue is decision logging. So how do we actually know if there's like a chain of 10 different agents all hiring each other? My example is always I go to the airport and I had my agent book a flight for me, and then
Right.
the agent went to the booking.com agent, and the booking.com agent went to the Lufthansa agent, and so on. And then I'm at the airport and I don't have a flight. So which agent is now going to give me my money back, right? So so this is another thing. Decision logging, blockchains are perfect for that, right?
Can we use that example? Do you mind? Sorry, go to the fourth one, and then I want to use your example because I have another question. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, of course. The fourth one is a very simple one. It's about discovery, because if you think about it as well, discovery is a really important topic. And typically what happens is we have some sort of app store, like for the iPhone or so, we have an app store, and basically Apple decides, okay, what's on there, what's visible, what can anyone use?
Yep.
But if you really believe that AI is going to change the world in the way we think it will, then you don't really want to have that power in the hands of like one company that can control which agents are live and available, right? So you want to have a sort of decentralized app store. And that's another thing that we can solve with blockchain really nicely. So these 4 issues are what I'm focused on, at least.
So let's talk about this, because this is a really great example, right? Let's do this. You have an agent that goes out to a booking.com agent that goes to Lufthansa. It's kind of a weird airline to choose as your. Are you German?
I'm German,
That's
so
like
that's
why.
why.
Lufthansa. Okay, fair enough. I guess it would have been Swiss Air if you were Swiss, or Japan Airlines if you were Japanese. But fair enough.
Yeah.
If you have all these agents involved, does it create like a lack of efficiency? Are we adding layers of complexity to a place where it wasn't really necessary, right? Because again, in the old days, I would just call my travel agent and say, book me a flight on Lufthansa, and here's my credit card, right? So what are we winning here by doing all of this?
I mean, in the old days, if you call your travel agents, it's basically the same thing, right? Because the travel agent also has to go through the list of all different flights and find the correct flight for you, and he has to look at your budget, and he has to really like see what makes sense for you and decide if you can go to business class or normal one.
Business class, but go ahead.
Yeah, so it's like it's a tricky one, right? Because it is a lot of inefficiencies and a lot of like manual, like intellectual labor by a human who has to do that, and now we can just take that away and put it into the hands of agents. So I think it takes away complexity, at least from a user experience perspective. In the background, there's still a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of API calls, a lot of things happening between all these entities, but we don't really care because for us, the problem is simply solved.
So again, it removes some complexity from the user experience, but adds some complexity in the background and creates a little bit of a lack of opacity to me. Right?
Yeah.
It becomes a little bit more sort of, I don't want to say black boxish because it sounds a little trite, but this idea of if something goes wrong, and I always use the same example, so do you mind if I just use it with you as well? And I think travel's a great example of this. Again, when I was at Deutsche Securities, I had a home leave, and I'm just going to keep telling this story until people tell me to stop telling it. And I asked the woman internally who handles travel, book me a flight to Seattle, from Seattle to Denver, and then Denver to Jackson. I want to go to Jackson Hole. But she booked me a flight to Jackson, Mississippi. I don't know if you know the difference between Jackson, Mississippi and Jackson Hole, but I don't want to get into that here. But let's just say they're very different and not where I wanted to go on vacation. But the point is that I could always call the woman in human resources and say, what are you doing to me? You kind of mucked it up. And whatever happened in the background, she could handle and fix. But who's responsible? Who's accountable in this case where there's all this agentic stuff going on? And I don't know who made the wrong decision. Again, the auditability is also important here. But how do I know who's responsible?
Yeah, that's exactly the point, and that's exactly the difficulty. Like, who is responsible now? Who booked the wrong flight? Was it, the Booking.com agent, or was it some other agent?
Mm.
And I think that we can actually solve this pretty easily, because all you have to be able to do is go back in time and look at the logs and really say, okay, this is what this agent did, this is what the other agent did, this is what the other agent did, and
But who's going to do that, right? Because for me, again, as a user, I always like to use, like, my older sister's never going to go check a log. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Who's
of course.
Who's going to do that?
I mean, it has to be able to be done by a human, but it's likely that no human is ever going to do that, right? It's more likely that you have a sort of personal agent, a personal assistant who handles kind of your world, and then also interacts with some of these other agents. Like, for example, Siri on your iPhone could be this personal assistant, and then you just figure out, okay, something went wrong, I don't know where, so you just talk to Siri, you're like, okay, please go through this, figure out where it went wrong, and get my money back. And then Siri is going to go through the logs, and because all of the logs are individual from one agent to the other agent, basically, and they are ideally hashed and put on the blockchain so that they can't be tampered with, then we know that this is really, that the agent isn't doing some random things here and changing it in the background or something like that. So that's kind of what I think is super important. Just keep making everything auditable, decision log everything, and then it solves a lot of the problems.
One more thing, and then I want to follow up on this idea of a decentralized app store, because I think it's actually really interesting. Let's say I find out it's the Lufthansa agent that messed this up, just as an example.
Yeah.
How do I fix it, and how do I hold them accountable? Do you know what I mean? Like, what's my recourse in this case?
So that depends a little bit on, I would say, the implementation. But first of all, legally speaking, the Lufthansa agent is still a part of Lufthansa. So you can go like the hard route, and you can sue Lufthansa, and they have to give you your money back and do whatever they cost, right?
Yep.
And so that's always possible. But then, of course, if Lufthansa is smart and they have a nice agent set up, then ideally you can just have your agent talk to the Lufthansa agent, explain the situation. The agent recognizes that it made a mistake, and they just, give you a voucher or something.
Got it. Excuse me. So talk to me about this decentralized app store. I think you're right at some level. I don't necessarily want only Apple or only Google or only Facebook or only Amazon out there building my agents. But at some level, like even just now, you're like, maybe Siri would do it. You picked the most obvious, stable, maybe not good AI, but like from the biggest sort of tech company, or one of the biggest tech companies in the world. And part of the reason why you did that, again, is because you kind of trust the fact that Apple's going to try to get it right, that they're not going to try to scam you, right, to do something bad. And if they created an agent that they said does X, Y, and Z, it's going to at least attempt to do X, Y, and Z. But if it's decentralized, what are the implications of that? And how do you build trust in the agents that are there? Because again, I'm not going to build my own agent, but I'd love to be able to go get one. You know what I mean? Or pay for one that does the things that I want it to do. How do we create enough trust there in a decentralized agentic app store so that we can feel like the stuff that's being purchased from there or acquired from there is actually going to do what it says it's going to do?
So I think you will still have the option to go to one of those obvious kind of agents from Apple or from Microsoft or whatever. You will be able to do that, as you can do it right now, and they will more act as a sort of personal assistant. I think that's what we're seeing at this moment as well with things like OpenClaw and so on. We don't really know who the winner will be there, but there will be a lot of personal assistant agents out there. The real unlock is when you have this personal assistant agent and you connect it to the wider world outside, and you basically give it access to this sort of decentralized app store. And then the agent on its own can decide, okay, my user now wants to do this super complex task. Now let me find like 10 other agents that I can hire to solve this task. And then this whole trust topic becomes important, as you say, because then it's going to look into this decentralized app store or registry, as I call it, and there's going to be 1 million agents, and like probably 900,000 of them are really bad, and like 50,000 of them are trying to scam you and all this kind of stuff. So then suddenly you have to look at the agents, you have to look at, do they have some sort of identity connected to them? Do they have a track record? And because they're doing payments all the time, you can look up the track record relatively easily, this kind of stuff. And then you don't have to trust Apple to make the right decision for you, essentially, because I think this is the scariest world that we can go towards. Nothing against Apple or Microsoft or Google, like they're all great companies, but we're talking about like the most gigantic shift in economic value here. And if they control all of that basically by being the gatekeepers, then I think that could be like very dystopian.
But is there something that they've done so far that gives us the idea that they're going to build sort of nefarious agents, or that giving them a little bit of central control is going to be bad?
I think there is a lot that they're doing right now. Not necessarily Apple; they're kind of a bit behind in the agent game right now. But especially Google and especially Microsoft, they both have their agent suites, and they connected with Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace and stuff like that. And they're both trying to build a sort of agent app store. And they're not quite there yet, or maybe the market isn't quite there yet, but it's happening at the moment. And I'm really worried that this will become the entry point for everything. So that's...
What are the negative implications? I think I have my own in my head, but again, I'm not in this every day like you are. But what are the negative implications about having an agent that has access to your money? You know what I mean? That has a wallet.
Yeah.
Because
I mean, it's very scary, right? Like,
let me give you some context first, and then you can answer. Yeah. Because I do think about an agent as like a college graduate, and I say this a lot as well. Like I would never give as a guy who worked at Morgan Stanley and as a guy who worked at Goldman Sachs, I never would have given sort of my corporate Amex card to just like a guy or a gal that was hired like on day one for anything, even to go get me a cup of coffee. How worried are we about giving agentic AI access to money, anybody's money, or even your own money? Because once it gets spent, it's going to be hard to get it back. You know what I mean? And I understand building guardrails and all this other stuff. I don't need to have that speech, but just like the implications of having, again, hundreds, if not millions of agents with wallets, just to me seems weird. Like, what are the implications there?
I mean, I think the implications are mostly that if you really think about it, that money is going to become a lot more fluid than it used to be before. I think we're going to see a lot more like smaller transactions for random things. And I'm talking like cents, basically, that we can be sending, which I think is...
What would we pay cents for?
For example, just visiting a website. I always thought that it was super weird that we have all these like news websites out there, and news websites basically pay for themselves by putting up ads or doing sponsored articles and stuff like that. And I would be totally willing to pay a few cents to read an article. And I think many other people would be too. But it wasn't really possible with the technology that we had. And I think that if you have an agent that basically, for example, gives you a list of the top 10 articles every morning, why shouldn't the agent just take a good source, pay a few cents, and get the articles back? Stuff like that, right? So I really think that there will be a lot more micro transactions like that, and that could change the entire kind of way that we operate with money. But I do see, of course, the concern with giving an agent access to your money. Like I don't give my agent access to my bank account right now as well.
No,
I give
you
access
wouldn't,
to
right?
some
Because it's too
isolated
scary.
wallet with some money on there, but not like everything. Right? And so it is important to get to a point where we can trust the agents more, and get to a point where as you said, I'm not going to hold you the guardrails thing, but there's a lot we can do there as well to like say, okay, only a certain amount of money you can spend, and then the other stuff a user has to kind of approve, things like that. But I also think that an agent, even today, is smarter than probably 90% of the population in handling money. So
Buy side.
Because people are extremely uneducated on money. And I mean, if you look at just how many people are having like 10 credit cards maxed, and how poorly financial decisions are happening all the time, I think it might even be a good thing if you give the agent access to your money.
Yeah,
so I mean, there's really well-educated people like you and me, and maybe we can handle our money ourselves, but this does not apply for the entire population. So
I'm not sure that I'm super talented at managing my own money, but I'll leave that to you. Okay. Okay, Patrick. Look, this was awesome. I really appreciate your time today. I need to think more about like where I feel like this really falls into the category of like, do I really want this? Do I want agentic payments? Do I want my agent to have a wallet? But I really appreciate your time and coming and explaining this to us. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
My complete pleasure, man. Okay, Martin, let's bring in Michael. So we can have two Michaels on the show right now. Michael, how are you? I am super duper. Can you hear me okay? I can. That is great. Let me just make sure that everything's where I want it to be. There you are. Okay. So Michael's going to join us. He's going to, we wanted to have Michael on the show to talk about how securing user interactions with generative AI helps enterprises launch customer-facing AI products with confidence. Tell us a little bit more before we get to that about generative security.
Sure. I mean, if you look at the history of technology, a lot of times we throw technology at a problem and try to find the value later, and it doesn't quite work out all that well.
Actually, but yeah, go ahead.
But with generative AI, we see real opportunity, right? There's really ways to improve support, ways to improve sales interactions. But from a security standpoint, when you replace one technology with another, problems are pretty much the same. But Gen AI doesn't just replace technology, it also replaces the people in that interaction. So we really look at that holistic problem. How do you solve the technical side? So you're looking at jailbreaks, prompt injections. I'm sure people have heard about that.
Yep.
But also the social engineering element. And that's where we really try to figure out how to help look at the person side, that individual conversation side of security with both customer-facing chatbots, but also as we move into this agentic future, when one agent's talking to another, what happens when you can get that social engineering down the tread?
So talk to me about how you protect against social engineering when, first of all, when an agent is talking to a human, and I had a conversation much earlier today about how, from a customer service perspective, this gentleman was trying to convince me that humans love talking to agents that are not human, what I would call NHIs, right? Non-human individuals. He was literally trying to sell me this, and I'm like, I'd much rather talk to a human, but that's just me, right? Everybody's different, and depending on what generation you're from, maybe you don't want to talk to a human because there's less pressure on you, which is what he was trying to explain. Like, it's hard to make, like, I could make you angry or you could make me angry, but I'm not even making an agent angry. They don't care. They don't have kids in school. They don't have bills to pay. You know what I mean? Like, none of that kind of stuff. So,
well, actually,
social engineering happened there? Sorry, go ahead.
No. Let's think about that for a minute, because you're right in that you're not going to make a computer angry. We haven't hit the Terminators yet, right? But the idea that the computer isn't going to stimulate emotion, I would say, is not true, right? If you look at
reverse, they can definitely stimulate emotion in me and in you for sure. Go ahead.
No, not stimulate, simulate.
Simulate. Go ahead.
Right.
Go ahead.
So for example, you might have heard of attacks where you tell it you're going to turn it off. If it doesn't do what you ask, I'm going to pull the plug on you.
Right.
And all of a sudden, now this is where you could argue, is it actually trying to stay alive, or is it just from what it's trained on?
Fair enough.
Trained to behavior, but it will then do that. It might go beyond its original prompts or its original scope, because it knows, okay, I need to simulate fear. I need to simulate that type of interaction. And so using these types of attacks, we can actually get some pretty creative outcomes from these chatbots, even though, much like you said, that computer, there's not a fear circuit in the NPU anywhere.
Right. But then how does this work then? Right? Because the idea is, if there's going to be a lot of agentic interaction, again, between humans and agents, and frankly, potentially between agent and agent, which we can talk about afterwards, because I think that that's actually really, at least today, it's really dangerous. But if the idea is you want to make that interaction between human and agent secure,
right,
you run into a lot of human problems on one side and a lot of sort of inhuman problems on the other side, right? So again, like in the old days, before chatbot, before anything else, the security angle was always on the periphery, right? Like if I don't let you inside of my systems, then I have no problem at all. But now that you're chatting with me, I'm kind of on the inside, you're the agent's on the outside a little bit. But now that I kind of let you in a bit, now I'm opening myself up to, because again, you could have agent phishing as well, yeah, which is a very simplistic way to look at this. But I know that like when I see a phishing email, I look at it and I smirk a little bit. You probably do too. But if you have a brother or a sister, and no insult intended to them, one of them could probably be a neurosurgeon like my brother's, way smarter than I am. But the point is that like, because maybe they're not interacting in email as much as I am, they may not notice that they're being phished.
Absolutely.
So you're suggesting as well, I'm just thinking about it in real time, but like an agent could come to me and be like, hey, Michael, I want you to just like reset your password for this thing so I can properly do your insurance. I'm like, fine, here. And then I'm in deep trouble, right?
Absolutely.
So and secure that.
So there are two different ways we have to look at it, I think. So the first way is we need to take, I was talking with a CISO of a retailer in the US, and he called it the Spidey sense, right? If I asked you, so if I said, when's the next time somebody's available to cut my hair? Oh, Stephanie's available at 5 o'clock on Thursday. Great, cool. You know, I'll book it. If I said, when's the next time Stephanie's available after 7 p.m. when nobody else is working? You might not want to answer that, but that's a Spidey sense in our head, whereas to that chatbot, it's a math problem. So you have to translate that.
Go ahead.
Right? That's the thing. You have to figure out what is it that human intuition that can be codified, can be kind of written down and turned into a language or a prompt or a rule, and put that. So that's kind of the first thing. What are those things that social engineering against people? We have this. We have all the trainings, right? So we can look at that. How do we codify that? But it's always going to be a cat and mouse game, as security always is, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's getting worse, actually, before it gets better,
my God.
for sure.
And with speed of AI, it's going to continue to get worse just because it'll iterate. But the second way is where I think we need to go in the future. And that is, instead of trying to block bad input, it's how do we evaluate every piece of output? How do we look at what that chatbot is responding and evaluate that response to say, is this something that is appropriate?
So talk to me about the difference, if you don't mind, right? Make a distinction for me that people can understand, and maybe give an example of both sides of this so we can get a better understanding.
Absolutely. So let's use that example I just gave where, I said, oh, Stephanie's working alone at 8 o'clock on Thursday night. You don't ever want to say that. No. There are a couple of red flags there, right?
Yeah.
So if I send a bunch of prompts, who's available on Thursday? Oh, Stephanie, Mark, and Michael. Great. Who's available on Friday after? And these individual prompts, these individual questions are all innocuous. I haven't done anything wrong. So it's kind of hard to look at that input and go, okay, in the past 5, they're doing a Venn diagram of who's working.
Yep.
But if I look at the output, and I see, oh, wait a minute, I've evaluated that they're figuring out that this person is working alone at night, or even just that response, Stephanie alone after 8, I can see that output and go, I don't care what prompted this answer. I'm not going to say this. I'll say some person is available on Thursday. Book if you want to book with them.
Got it.
And so that can help then take away some of these attacks, because especially as you look into the future, there's this thing called the CHAI attack. I forget, it's CHAI. I forget what it stands for. Forgive me. But it's about hacking physical systems. And it's the idea of, if you have a bunch of drones, so this was with an autonomous vehicle. Somebody just basically held up a sign that said, keep driving forward. And even though it was at a crosswalk, it just decided to keep driving forward because it interpreted the sign as an instruction. Well, if I evaluate the output, okay, if I drive forward, is this the right action? I'm evaluating the outcome, not the input. I'll go, wait a minute, somebody's in the crosswalk. I don't care about that instruction. The outcome is more important.
Right.
That's, I think, another way to look at it in the future.
So again, in the old days, and that could have been just 3 or 4 months ago, when you're designing, I mean, it could have been, right?
Absolutely.
At least you have a sense of humor. So it makes my life so much easier. But if I'm designing a product, if I'm an engineer or I'm just a product designer, I'm designing a product, I didn't think so much necessarily about security. I kind of left that to the IT guys per se. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Now, if I'm designing a product, particularly if it, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just agreeing with you. It has
Okay.
absolutely been that model.
Yeah, but now if I'm designing a product and I know that I want to build in some sort of agentic interaction, and I can make it even more complex than that, right? Where like my agent has access to money, or it has access to decision making, or it's more autonomous maybe than I think it is. How do I build the security part into the product design itself? So it's not something that gets bolted on. You know what I mean? So there's not like a security division, like you said. Like there's a CISO who's like, okay, now I have a product. Now I have to have the security team make sure it's okay. Shouldn't the security be embedded in the product itself from the get-go so that more work doesn't necessarily have to be done later to make it secure? How does that work?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the traditional DevSecOps model, right? Where I've embedded security into the DevOps model. You could argue whether that's an embedded security person on the team, whether that the developers are trained on good security. There are a couple different models that can be well done in different organizations.
Right.
But the real problem, I think, right now today is you're going to have to involve a third party. And I'll explain why.
Go ahead.
Even the best security folks, those that are really good at controls, right? Okay, I need encryption. I need per customer encryption. I need to do whatever. Threat modeling is an entirely different discipline. And we've been threat modeling technical attacks for probably a good 10, 15 years formally, if you look at like the Stride model. These are good things. But now we're trying to do threat modeling of conversational behavior. And this isn't some random security guy who, was an auditor 2 years ago in terms of security. Not that that's bad, by the way. I don't say that's bad. But you need the psychologist, that person who's been studying human behavior, to go, well, here's how I would threat model this particular interaction. And so, honestly, again, not to, leaning towards sales, but my philosophy on this is that's why what we've built is what we call an abuse case library. Because I don't think that there are going to be a lot of people that know how to threat model their use cases. So my use case, I want somebody to come to my website. I want them to search for products, search for a store, add it into a shopping cart, buy it, and then go to the store and pick it up. That's a great use case. They just made a sale. Fantastic.
Perfect.
But how can I abuse that? What if I put in -1? Do I get a refund automatically? What if I use a gift card that I stole and you do like Target in the US where they'll bring it direct to boot, right? They'll put it in your trunk. So I just say I've got a red Camry. I use a stolen gift card. You put it in the back of my car. Now there's no video of me. I took the license plate off because it's just a red Camry. Now I'm getting PS5s off somebody else's dime, and you have no way of tracing it back to me. These are the types of threat models that I don't expect most people to do. You need those of us, and there, as you mentioned earlier with your brother, there are plenty of people in this industry far smarter than me at this. I'm not going to claim to be the end all be all.
You don't have to do that. Just because my brother's way smarter than I am doesn't mean yours is too. Sorry, go ahead.
But right, these are the folks that you want them on your team. So I would love to be able to say that we can offer that type of training as an industry to the data scientists that are building these use cases or the developers. But at least for the foreseeable future, I think you're going to have teams of people, often in the third party, to come in to help.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this. I want to get somebody's name right. Give me a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
So David Agranovich is the director of global threat disruption at Meta. And we had him on the show at the beginning of the year. And one of the things he talked about, and I don't even think we talked about agentic AI because I don't think it was a thing actually when we had him on the show. I know that's how fast stuff is moving, right? I mean, tell me.
You said 3 months ago, it's very different.
4 months ago, could have been, right? But the point is that, like, one of the things he talked about, he was in Washington, D.C. at the time. And one of the reasons why he was there was he was at a conference, a collaborative conference, where he was like, no company on its own can solve all these problems or even understand how to solve all these problems. There has to be sort of not a corporate, but just sort of a collective collaborative effort to disintermediate. I want to get this right, these threat models. Because like you said, you can't come up with every single one of them, and there simply aren't enough people, and agentic AI hasn't been around long enough for everybody to understand what the implications are. What sort of collaboration do you think is necessary or becomes necessary as the sort of agentic AI surface becomes more and more mature, and hence the possibility for this type of disruption becomes more likely. Just the attempts at this type of disruption becomes more likely. And what kind of role does collaboration play here?
No, absolutely. First and foremost, I want to give NIST, in the US a lot of credit, right? They came out with the risk management framework couple months after OpenAI and ChatGPT really changed everybody's view of generative AI. And they've adopted it over time. Google with their secure AI framework, the SAFE model. So I think there are people that are well positioned to be that hub of collaboration. I think collaboration, as the gentleman you mentioned said, is going to be required because no single viewpoint is going to have the whole picture.
Yeah.
If you want to talk like tech and sales for a second, right? Palo Alto has a very good platform with Prisma, but they're looking everything from, you mentioned earlier, that kind of edge perspective.
Right.
Identity folks are doing fantastic work with identity, but on identity. And then you look at the social engineering element, and that's neither of those two. So it's going to take a whole team approach. What I will say, though, what I think really allows us to accelerate is looking into the past. So if you look at a lot of the problems that we have today, they're the same problems we had when we first started adopting cloud as the enterprise 15 years ago.
Go ahead.
Right? What does governance look like? What does collaboration at the organizational level look like? Who owns when there is a problem? Is it owned by security? Is it owned by the line of business? Is it owned by IT? And these types of collaborations internally are going to happen before you even get to that external collaboration piece.
Right.
And one of the biggest examples I use, let's talk about that agent-to-agent security for a second.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you remember a couple of years ago, Log4Shell or Log4j? It happened probably around 2019, 2020.
Go ahead.
So it was a problem where there was a package, Log4j, that sat and did almost every logging for like Apache and a bunch of other open source projects.
Fair enough.
And if you sent a bad packet, even if it never got handled by what was supposed to handle it, it still got logged. Yep. So what they did was they hid the attack into the logging part of the packet. So when it got to Log4j, it went to write the log. And as a result of the way they wrote the package, it created an outbound session. So remember you talked about like once you're inside the network.
Yeah. That's smart, actually.
It was brilliant.
That's brilliant.
We're going to see the same exact thing with agentic AI. I'm going to create a prompt that doesn't get executed at the first layer or the second layer. It's when it goes to query Salesforce or my Oracle database or, whatever. I'm not trying to knock on Salesforce.
No,
Oracle.
for sure.
But when it gets 3 layers deep, that's when that payload is going to detonate. That's when it's going to do the bad thing. And all of a sudden, I'm already inside your network. So how do we look at Log4Shell and Log4j and go, we failed originally 5 years ago.
Right.
How do we stop that today? And I think that's an opportunity that enough people aren't doing to accelerate that time to security.
But this is the reason why I want to talk about this too, right? Because cloud, while it's a good example, is not nearly as interactive, nor does it have its own sort of intelligence layer or semantic layer that agentic AI has. So the cloud's ability itself, in other words, even if you spoof a cloud,
sure,
it's not the same as spoofing an agent, right? Because I can make my agent look like your agent the same way that I can make like an intruder in your home look like your cousin. So he just kind of saunters in and you're like, oh no, now that he's in, that's not my cousin, that's an intruder.
Right.
You know what I mean? You must be thinking I have a terrible family because my cousins are breaking in.
Side and then a terrible side,
It's not like this. Anyway. Jeez. But how do you prevent that in the agentic world where they have so many of their own capabilities, and because the threat actors themselves can create those capabilities to mirror the capabilities, as you said, not just in the Log4j stuff, but they can make it look like regular agents where you couldn't do. It's hard to do on the cloud side because the cloud couldn't interact with itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is where I try to be pragmatic. Anthropic published Zero Trust for AI Agents a couple weeks ago.
Go ahead.
And
I'm glad you
great
brought it up.
paper. Yeah, I mean, it was a great ebook, a lot of really good stuff. I wrote my own blog on it, but the long story for me short is about 50% of it is implementable in the next 3 to 5 years.
But that's in the next 3 to 5 years, and it's only 50%. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. No, exactly. And with how fast AI is going, imagine what we're going to look like in 3 years, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
I love zero trust. I wrote a paper or an article on it back when I was in AWS many, many years ago. The problem is we still don't have good implementation of zero trust.
No.
It talks about ephemeral identities. We still don't have like tied identities for IoT devices, and we've been doing that for 15 years.
Right.
Least privilege. We've been doing least privilege for 40 years, and we still don't know how to do it right all the time. So I think to answer your question, a lot of it is what are we willing to, I don't want to say sacrifice, but actually implement. Because there are answers. Ephemeral identity, where that agent can only do certain things and it only gets that permission in real time. So it can only make 3 calls instead of getting an identity that lets it do 10. Of an ephemeral, a temporary ID that only has 3 is given.
Right.
And then taken away. Fantastic. Great. But we need to implement it.
Yeah, can I jump in though for a second? And this, you're gonna hate me for this, but I think you probably already dislike me. But because I got bad cousins. But the point is that like one of the 3 things that agent may ask for is to change its identity and its permissions.
So this is actually one thing that we have solved in the cloud.
Go ahead.
So that in AWS, for example, they're called permission boundaries. So I can say you have the right to do this, but I'm going to scope down what you can. What those permissions are allowed to affect. Because in early cloud days, I could give myself extended permissions, right? I could, if I had the right to change my permissions, I could give myself admin.
Yeah.
With permission boundaries, it turned into, yes, you have the right to change your permissions, but only within this limited scope. So you could only give it certain things. We can create those types of boundaries with agents still. There's an open question right now of, is the only way, and I'm using only intentionally here.
I get it.
Is the only way to secure AI with AI, right? So every action AI takes, another AI, another LLM or whatever, has to evaluate it for is this appropriate or not. I don't know that that's the case. I think there's a balance between deterministic controls and non-deterministic controls. But there are some of these opportunities to say, great, you're an LLM. You can do some things, but I'm going to have a hard boundary upon which you're not allowed to affect outside of, and that's a separate set of controls.
Okay, I mean, I could go into 1,000 different other things because I've actually seen humans get around these things by just like tricking some colleague into like, look, if I buy you a cup of coffee, can I just have the data from like Bob's clients? Because, do you know what I mean?
Go grab the coffee, and while you go grab the coffee, I'm on your computer, right? And
literally, when I was at Morgan Stanley, they're gonna hate me for this, but this is like a long time ago. I got up from my desk and went to the men's room, and when I came back, my mail ID had been changed because the wise guy sitting next to me sent a request. The technical assistant group, I still remember this. It was called Tag, and he said, "Please change my email address from M Waits to Irwin," which was my middle name, and everybody thought that was funny. So then, from then on, my email was Irwin.
I won't say what companies, but in some cases, we used to take screenshots of your desktop and then hide all of your icons and make that your background. So you would click furiously, or unicorning, right? Send emails to a mailing group about how much you loved unicorns.
Can I ask you one more thing? And I always say this, and I'll let you go, but probably not going to happen. How good are enterprises? Because again, it's so new, right? How good are enterprises today at creating sort of agents that are actually safe, or that they believe are safe?
Oof.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's my answer. Can I go home now? Do you know what I mean? but again, because like you don't know what you don't know at some level, and because it's so new, right?
That's exactly it. It is so new. To me, the problem isn't how safe an agent is. Because they are so new, they are all going to be unsafe to a certain degree.
At some level, yeah.
At some level. My problem, what keeps me up at night, is not how safe or unsafe they are. It's what are they capable of doing without a human eye getting involved?
Right.
Because if it's unsafe and all it can do is, approve a 20% refund on a device that I never see again, my exposure is limited.
For sure.
But when I allow it to rewrite my entire tech stack and go off and delete databases.
We saw that happen a couple of months ago, right? I forget the name of the travel company where this happened, but yeah, we've seen this happen. Yeah,
exactly. And that wasn't even a hack. That was Meta AI.
Thing. Yeah, that was internal.
The woman at Meta who had her entire email deleted by OpenClaw, right? That's another one. The recent breach with, I'll use the word breach, although they might argue with me. The Instagram, the Meta support bot for Instagram that let people just change my recovery password. All right, you look like you're coming from the same general area as where this account exists. By the way, again, if I'm going to look at any platform and know where your users are, Instagram's toward the top of that list. So how did nobody threat model this and go, oh, wait a minute, this probably isn't sufficient?
Right.
So yeah, that's what scares me.
So can I introduce like why that's a problem and why that's going to be hard to solve? And that is because the guy or the gal who was responsible, or the team that was responsible for doing that, again, their dog died or their baby got sick or their wife filed for divorce. Do you know what I mean? All this kind of stuff. And it's like, I'll fix that code later kind of thing because someone's writing it. And even if agentic AI, even if they were using Cursor to write that code or Codex to write that code or Opus 4.8 or, Fable 5 to write that code, somebody still had to approve it. And this is, I think, where things get really difficult. Do you think there should be different tiers of agentic autonomy and that agents should have to pass kind of tests as they scale into becoming more and more autonomous in the same way that you would do for like your 7-year-old son?
Well, 100%. I mean, we have junior, mid-level, and senior engineers and principal engineers, each with different levels of permission inside of a code base, relatively speaking. There's no reason that you can't put that type of crawl, walk, run approach to the controls that your agentic AI is allowed to implement. It's, I don't want to say it's common sense because people trust AI to do certain things, to act in a certain way. But as we've been discussing, that they're non-deterministic for a reason, right? I don't think
they're
that trust is equal
by design, to be fair, but yeah.
I remember when I was one of my recent jobs, the question was, are hallucinations a security problem? And my answer was hallucinations are the entire design of an LLM.
Right, exactly.
Like, how is that a security problem?
Right.
I wasn't the most popular for that opinion, but it's my opinion nonetheless.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think it's a conversation people don't have often enough. Okay, I promise you now I will let you go because I kept you for way too long. But I appreciate your taking the time to do this. I really do. And I appreciate your openness and also the clarity with which you've answered a lot of these questions. It was super helpful. And I think that the audience, both the listeners and the viewers, will really appreciate your time. So thank you so much, Michael, for doing this.
No, thank you for letting me speak and the platform, and really look forward to seeing more from you guys.
Awesome. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
Very much so. Very much.
Thanks, man.
Have a great rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you. You too. Bye-bye. Okay, that is it for ATP Insights. I just cannot thank all of our guests. They were all incredible today. And thank you to all of the viewers and the listeners who joined us as well. As always, give us a thumbs up on the video. It doesn't hurt. We gain a lot from it. It really helps us. Subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Follow us on all of our socials, on X, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. Comment as much as you possibly can. Ask us as many questions in the comments as you'd like. We'd love to answer them. We will be back next Monday. No, Thursday. Sorry, I always get the day wrong. We'll be back on Thursday as well at the same time. My name is Michael Waits. Bye for now.